all-out discussion on the first round of the NBA playoffs is Sportswriter Josh Planos, who is joining us all the way from Nebraska in the United States of America. Josh, good morning from Manila, good evening to you, and happy Easter. Welcome back to the show.
Happy Easter, Andre. Thanks so much for having me.
I like that Easter jacket. I should have something like that tailored for the show, man. Like it, looking sharp. Okay, let's start. The Utah Jazz already have a 1-0 lead over the Dallas Mavericks, but the big story of this series, no Luka Doncic so far for this. It's going to be huge. Without Luka, I don't think how Dallas will move to the second round. Luka already missed game one because of his calf strain, and there are reports that he may miss game two as well. So how do the Mavs overcome Luka's absence, and can they pull it off, beat the Jazz in this series, win a game without Luka?
Andre, Dallas can't expect to survive this series both without Luka and by shooting less than 30% from three. That's exactly what happened in game one. It's not going to get it done against any team in the league come playoff time. They also need more out of Spencer Dinwiddie, who was incredible during the regular season. He was nearly an 80% free throw shooter, but in game one, he only went 10 for 16 from the stripe in game one. Right. Again, they lost that game by 6 points. He missed 6 free throws. That's not good enough in a tight game. He will play better moving forward, and I'm sure they're going to get more out of Jalen Brunson too, because he runs the show when Luka is off the court. But they do need their backcourt to step up in a big way moving forward if they want to compete in this series.
Well, 4 of the starters for Jason Kidd played over 35 minutes. Reggie Bullock had 44 minutes. Finney Smith played 44. Brunson played 40, as you mentioned. Dinwiddie played 36. Powell with 22 minutes. Well, the Jazz obviously taking advantage without Luka Doncic here for the Mavs. What will it take for Utah, for them to sustain this momentum they already have against the Mavs, especially if Luka Doncic does make it back down the road in this series?
Well, it's encouraging that they still eked out a win on the road in a game in which Donovan Mitchell was 10 of 29 from the field. That's, remarkable. Bogdanovich was incredible, as was Mike Conley. So them continuing to provide valuable minutes on the offensive end is a priority, continuing to be one of the best defenses in the league, which they've done for 7 consecutive years now. That's a priority. And then winning as much as possible before Luka returns is also a priority, because if we know anything about that guy, it's that he can take over a playoff series in a hurry.
Well, yeah, Donovan, you did mention 10 of 29 in that game one, but still finished with 32 points in 41 minutes. Let's move to the number 2 seed and the number 7th seed, the Memphis Grizzlies and the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Wolves felt like they won a championship when they beat the Clippers in that play-in game. 2 exciting young teams. I like these 2 teams. They got young guns. You got Ja Morant on one end. You got Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards on one end. Going head-to-head, the matchups are incredibly nice, like young and really exciting. And the Wolves are coming in hot. As I mentioned, they beat the Clippers as if they won the championship to make it to the playoffs, and then beating the Grizzlies in game one at Memphis yesterday. Tell us, Josh, how did the Wolves do that? And what will it take for Minnie for them to sustain their run and eventually stun the Grizz in this best-of-7 series?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Anthony Edwards, Andre, because he looked like one of the future faces of the league in game one. We knew he was a fantastic player, right? But not many expected this. There aren't many players who can go for 36 in a playoff debut or play like the best player on the court at 20 years old. And he did both the other night. Truly, if he is this spectacular this soon, Minnesota fans have a lot to be excited for moving forward. As a team, the Timberwolves, I thought, dominated the Grizzlies on the boards. They controlled the perimeter on both ends, and they made it so Ja Morant had to beat them 1-on-5 in the fourth quarter. Ja, of course, has beaten a lot of teams this season with crunch time play, but it was always kind of a team effort that pushed this squad over the top. And when they ran out of gas in game one, they didn't get enough from the role players to get the win. And so I think Memphis has a lot to certainly adjust, but first and foremost is getting Ja Morant some help, especially in crunch time.
I am excited for Anthony Edwards. My NBA cards are secure with that. The future of that guy looks really bright. Now, looking at the numbers here, Minnesota, better field goal percentage, 50% in game one compared to 45% of the Grizzlies and shot better from beyond the arc at 39% compared to only close to 26% for the Grizz. What will it take for Memphis to bounce back and play the way that they've been playing all season long and take this series as quickly as possible?
So they looked really tight early on, and I think that will loosen up as the series progresses. Remember, this team has never really made a playoff run with this specific team. And then as exciting as he is, it can't just be the Ja Morant show. You know, they need more out of guys like Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane and even DeAnthony Melton off the bench. This team also can't afford to lose Jackson to quick foul trouble, which has plagued him, frankly, his entire career. I mean, this guy might win Defensive Player of the Year, and he's the linchpin of this team's defensive performance. So they need him on the court to play the brand of basketball that got them there. And they need him on the court if they're going to make a deep run this postseason. They just got 24 minutes out of him in game one, and that's not going to cut it if this team hopes to make a playoff push.
Well, that Utah-Dallas series, Memphis-Minnesota series, done. Just 2 matchups, Josh. Got 6 more to go. Stay where you are. Our discussion on the NBA playoffs will continue after a short break. Have with us today, sports writer Josh Planos joining us from Nebraska. Josh and I have been talking about the NBA playoffs, which tipped off yesterday, and things are really getting heated up. A lot of great game ones so far. We've got 2 more matchups to go to talk about in the West right now, Josh. Let's move on to the Dubs against the Nuggets. The Golden State Warriors facing the number 6 Denver Nuggets, and of course the Warriors lead the series 1-0 so far after winning game 1 with what has been called a death lineup. Talk about how potent this lineup is, and what will it take for the Nuggets to stop this lineup. Curry is back there. You got Clay, you got Draymond, Jordan Poole. What a game in game 1. Talk about the Dubs, man.
Well, small ball lineups have elevated the Warriors to 3 championships in the last 7 seasons. So it's downright terrifying for the rest of the league to hear about another possible one. We had Steph, Clay, Poole, Wiggins, and Draymond outscoring Denver by 14 points in just 5 minutes of action in game 1. It fully swung the game in Golden State's favor. And again, is terrifying for the rest of the league to hear about this potentially happening again. I think Denver can make some schematic adjustments. They can slow the game down. They can try to beat them up on the glass, but ultimately they're just going to need to pray that Golden State misses a few shots in those minutes, because if Golden State operates as effectively as they did the other night, we could be talking about bringing another championship to the Bay for Golden State.
They got to activate everything that they can activate. You mentioned prayers. And you saw Nikola Jokic. He was winded, man. He looked like he really needed a breather during that game. Well, Denver's Michael Porter Jr. is hoping to return in the first round of the playoffs. Of course, he hasn't played since November 6th. We don't know about Jamal Murray, but if assuming MPJ comes in here, here's a young guy, a versatile young guy, can play big, play small, can do a lot of things for you on both ends of the floor. What kind of impact do you see Michael Porter Jr. having here, especially considering he just came off an injury and hasn't played for a while?
Yeah, I mean, not much, because who knows where his conditioning is at, right? I mean, when fully healthy, Porter has the potential to be one of the most skilled offensive players in the league, but we don't know how his body's going to hold up. He's always been kind of a minus defensive player, and Golden State really knows how to pick those guys apart. So unless his conditioning is ready for playoff competition, I think he could be getting run off the court rather quickly. But, you know, when he's fully healthy, this guy has the potential to be one of the most skilled players offensively in the league. So I'm sure Denver, you know, will take all the help they can get at this point.
Okay, right now, I was just updated by my executive producer. The Suns just blowing out the Pels. I don't know if you're surprised with that. Number 1 Phoenix Suns, number 1 in the league against the Pelicans. Had to win a couple of games to make it to the playoffs and in the play-in. So on paper, obviously, Phoenix has the advantage here. They're a more complete team. They have that experience last year, losing to the Bucks in the finals. Let's go to the Pels side. What will it take for Coach Willie Green and the New Orleans Pelicans to defy all the odds here and pull off a shocker and even win 1 game against Phoenix?
For starters, I think they'll need at least 60 points between Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum every single night. I think they're going to need to beat up Phoenix on the boards. with Jackson Hayes and Jonas Valanciunas. And more than anything, I think they're going to be needing to be able to control the pace of play. New Orleans really likes to run, and so they'll need to test that transition defense of Phoenix, because when it's set, the Suns are a brick wall. So New Orleans has to at least make them attempt to play their brand of basketball. A lot of teams have tried and failed in that pursuit. But certainly the odds are stacked against New Orleans. So, the expectation, right, is that this is a 4 games and out series.
Under 3 minutes to play in the first half, Phoenix up 43-28. D-Book, Devin Booker, leading the way with 12 points for Phoenix, also with 5 assists so far. How can Phoenix make sure the Pels, they don't stun them in the first round? You did mention for the Pels to be able to have a chance against Phoenix, you need 30 from McCollum, you need 30 from Brandon Ingram. But how about Phoenix? How can they just, let's finish this quickly and move on to the next round?
I think Phoenix just needs to make sure its roster arrives at the arena on time. As fun as New Orleans has been in the second half of the season, they have no business making this series competitive against a fully healthy Phoenix team. It's the best team in basketball. They're loaded at every spot on the floor, from the top of the key to the wing to the paint. Plus, they're the deepest roster in the league. So for the Suns, it's continuing to do what got them here to advance and nothing more. I think that talent-wise, this team should have no trouble getting through the first round. And really the expectation, right, is championship or bust for the Suns, which is kind of remarkable because, that would be an unprecedented feat.
Just make sure everybody is on the bus, or if they're in Phoenix, all their cars are okay and moving good, especially CP3 and Devin Booker. Let's move on. Let's move back to the Eastern Conference. We'll move to the Eastern Conference right now. And let's start with the Sixers, the Philadelphia 76ers and the Toronto Raptors. Sixers already have a 1-0 lead here after winning Game 1, a career performance from Tyrese Maxey. How good do the Sixers look to you, and what will be the keys for them to take this series?
Yeah, assuming everything holds, Philly should cruise into the second round. They're collectively way more talented than Toronto, and they have the 2 best players on the floor in the series. And then you add Maxey into the calculus, and he had probably the best game of his life in Game 1, and it's like hot fudge on top of a sundae, right? It's just kind of an addition. I think Embiid alone could average 30 and 10 for Philly in this series, but I'm sure they want to get that 2-way action going with him and Harden to make sure that this team and this offense is formidable for the rest of the postseason. So I like the 2 of them working off one another. Certainly Danny Green's going to play a major role on both ends of the floor, but really it starts and ends with Embiid. And if you get James Harden back to all-star status, this team could be really scary.
Well, unfortunately for Toronto, their star rookie, Scotty Barnes, one of the favorites to win Rookie of the Year, he is doubtful for Game 2 because of that ankle sprain he suffered. It looked bad in Game 1, man. Josh, how do the Raptors overcome without Scotty Barnes? His absence is going to be huge for this team in this series, and turn the tables here on the Sixers. How can they still pull things off even without a complete lineup on the floor against Philly?
Yeah, they look completely outgunned in Game 1, Andre. It's unlikely that Philly will get that kind of performance out of Maxey consistently. So assuming that he kind of falls back to earth, they need Fred VanVleet to win that matchup. And more than that, they probably need more of Nick Nurse's patented defensive lineup changes that paved the way for the Raptors to win a title in 2019. Remember the box and one. Certainly they need to, understand how to throw double teams at Embiid without sacrificing the perimeter, which is always the crux of the issue for opponents. But there's a lot of changes that need to be made and a lot of chaotic variables that need to be introduced for Toronto to have a chance in this series. Certainly they need a lot out of OG Anunoby. And like I said, Fred VanVleet is essential for them on the offensive side of the ball. If they're not getting, at least 25, at least 30 out of him, that's going to be a problem.
Well, Josh, stay where you are. Let's take another quick break, my friend. Of course, our analyst, Sportswriter Josh Planos from the U.S. And Josh, I was about to say earlier before we head on to the break, before we continue our NBA discussion, it's time for your favorite segment. Let's find out the answer to our quiz question of the day. No one sent in questions, but I want you to answer this question. Jordan Poole is the 3rd Warriors player in franchise history to score 30 points in their playoff debut. Who are the other 2? Josh, take it away, my friend.
So my guess would be Monte Ellis and Steph Curry.
Oh, great guesses. Those are really safe bets. Let's find out the answers here. Well, your guesses are as good as mine. Well, we're both wrong. The correct answers are apparently on our screens. Will Chamberlain, who did it in 1960, and Mitch Richmond, who accomplished the feat back in 1989. How about that? Wilt and Mitch Richmond. Okay. Now let's talk about in the East. The Atlanta Hawks had to squeak in some games in the play-in to make it to the playoffs. Game 1 going to Miami after blowing out Atlanta earlier today, 115-91. Ice tray, really ice, as in cold from the floor, wasn't hitting anything. How did Miami do this summary here? How did Miami do it? Just wrap up Game 1 as quick as possible. And what will it take for them to finish the Hawks right away in this series?
Well, Miami's the deeper team, Andre. So when they get 8 threes out of Duncan Robinson and 16 points out of PJ Tucker, it almost feels unfair to the opponent. This has been a great defensive team all season. So I think continuing to put the clamps on Atlanta is a near certainty. They've matched up really well with them all season long. And the Hawks are injured. We're talking about John Collins basically returning back to action for the first time in a long time. They need Clint Capella back in a big way. So I think that, Miami just kind of needs to continue doing what they're doing. And they should have no trouble breezing through the first round.
That was a scary sight for Atlanta Hawks fans. Clint Capella hyperextending his knee in that play-in game against Cleveland. Hopefully he comes back in this series. He's much needed. And you mentioned John Collins, 10-4, 10 points, 4 boards in 21 minutes in his comeback here in Game 1 against Miami. How do the Hawks bounce back here? Of course, we need Trey to score in double figures. He just finished with 8 points, 1 of 12 from the floor, 0 of 7 from beyond the arc. But aside from Trey getting hot, what else is needed for Atlanta to pull off an upset against Miami here?
Yeah, that was probably the worst shooting game of the season for Trae Young. We've seen him have incredible playoff performances, and I think he'll need to string together a lot of them to pace Atlanta to a series win. They need at least 30 points out of him every single night. They also need Clint Capella back to return from injury as soon as possible. And then I think they need somebody like a wild card like Bogdanovich or Herter to get going, because really they need a lot of help offensively. Miami is so skilled defensively that unless Atlanta has kind of one of those miscellaneous players, one of those third or fourth options kind of spark some sort of scoring output, it's going to be Trey or nothing for Atlanta every single time down the court. So defensively, they've got a lot of work to kind of shore up the interior, because Bam kind of went nuts, and certainly the perimeter shooting attack of Miami went crazy as well. But Atlanta has a lot to do on both ends of the floor. I think, though, that they need some of these role players to step up and score, because Trey needs all the help he can get.
Onyeka Okongwu was the starter in place of Clint Capella, only had 3.7 boards. Bogdanovich only had 6. Herter also just had 8. Now let's move on. One of the series I'm really excited about, and I think we'll go to distance. Let's move on to this Boston Celtics at number 2 against the Brooklyn Nets, number 7 here. Boston winning Game 1 thanks to that man with that game winner, Jason Tatum. It was a close call for Boston, but a win is a win. What should the C's do to make sure they don't go through these types of scares again against a team that has 2 of the most prolific scorers in the game in Durant and Irving, and how do they survive the Nets in this series?
Andre, I anticipate a lot of these games going down to the wire, so I'm not sure that the adjustments are going to curtail that. This is probably going to be the most exciting series of the opening round. Boston got great offensive performances out of Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, Al Horford. They only play a handful of guys, right? And at least offensively, they seem to maximize their possessions in Game 1. I think they can do a better job of controlling the paint, as good as they were. And I think they can continue to convert those paint touches to attack Brooklyn's weakness, which seems to be rebounding and anything on the inside. I really like, though, what they did in the second half, specifically on Durant defensively. They took away a lot of his driving lanes. They sent double teams early and often. So I'd anticipate a lot of that moving forward. And really, it was a pretty strong game plan from Boston. So more of the same moving forward.
Yep, you're right there. They did a really great job blitzing every time Katie had a ball. And Tatum had 31, or Horford at 20 and 15, Jaylen Brown with 23, and Marcus Smart with 20. The Nets could have won easily Game 1. What a great game from Kyrie Irving there. A fairly good game for Durant, but not the KD that we want to see in the playoffs. But what adjustments should Steve Nash and the Brooklyn Nets make, to take the rest of the series and, get one even in Boston?
Yeah, they're going to get better shooting performances out of Kevin Durant, like you noted. So not much to be worried about there. I thought Kyrie Irving was incredible.
Oh, yeah.
So the hope for them is that he'll continue to play near that level moving forward. Andre, I think they need to stay locked in on Jason Tatum. He had 16 points in the second half, including the game winner. He got loose in the final half, and especially on that final play, they basically lost complete track of him. And a lot of those plays in which he was scoring in the second half were defensive breakdowns. So those need to be patched up. We've talked all season long about how capable Brooklyn is, but defense has consistently let this club down. So now is really the time that they need to establish that rhythm. Even if you can't be a great defensive team, you can prevent breakdowns better than they did in game one. And then on the interior, it's unacceptable to give up 56 points in the paint and 14 offensive rebounds in the postseason. Those numbers have to change. Otherwise, Brooklyn's not going very far.
Yeah, that's the problem with Brooklyn. They got two guys who can really score from anywhere, but these two have to play great every game, and they need all the help that they can get from those guys, from Dragic, from Drummond, from Curry, and the rest of the bench. Finally, let's go to the number 3 seed Milwaukee Bucks, your defending champs, against the number 6 seed, the Chicago Bulls. Another close battle here in Game 1. This is a good series with the Bucks coming out on top. Well, what kind of edge do they have, speaking of Milwaukee, over Chicago, and how do the Milwaukee Bucks sustain their momentum heading into Game 2?
Well, this is more of the same for Milwaukee. Remember that last year, this team lost Game 1 in every single playoff round with the exception of one, and went on to win a championship. So they've been here before. The Bucks are the better team, plain and simple. They should advance out of this series. They're much bigger. They've got the best player in the series. I think, though, that this was actually a huge win for them because it felt like a game to me that Chicago needed to steal to compete in the series. Even though DeRozan and Levine and Vucevic all shot pretty horribly from the field, Chicago did turn this game into a rock fight and still ended up losing. So I think all signs point to Milwaukee playing far better as the series progresses. So to shoot as poorly as they did from the field in Game 1 and still steal a win is a great sign for them moving forward. I still think that they need a lot more right out of role players. Certainly Brook Lopez elevated his play, but they need Drew Holiday to step up in addition to Giannis, of course.
Well, Holiday had 15, 6 and 6. Middleton only had 11, 5 and 6. Well, going to Chicago, I know it would have been different if Lonzo Ball was playing. He had that injury. It was fun to see Lonzo at the start of the season, the way they played, speaking of Chicago. But how will Chicago bounce back in this series and hopefully pull off an upset against the defending champs?
They need DeMar DeRozan in a big way to show up in Game 2. He was nowhere to be found, especially down the stretch. He's been Chicago's closer all season long. They need him to be that in this series.
Well, Josh, as always, my man, thank you for being here on the show. We owe you a lot already. Always great to speak to you about the NBA. Happy Easter to you, regards to your wife. Loving that gold jacket, man. Stay safe. We'll talk to you again soon. NBA playoffs now showing. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Andre.
Again, we just spoke to sports writer Josh Planos, joining us from Nebraska in the U.S. And we